Hi, I'm Jason, and I'm the host of this educational YouTube channel. I'm a researcher, a scientist, and a father of four. Citizens of Earth is an educational organization that produces on-demand, science-backed courses for the most important skills in life. Today, we're talking to a colleague, one of my best friends, and one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. Dr. Sakrejda earned a bachelor's degree from Mount Holyoke College, where she double majored in biology and English. She is a biostatistician, a data scientist, and an entrepreneur. She is currently co-CEO of a financial technology company called Capital Pulse. Capital Pulse uses advanced analytics to help healthcare providers improve their financial results and consequently better help their patients. Capital Pulse uses AI to pay for healthcare providers' work now, so that they don't have to wait for governments or health insurance companies to pay, which can take anywhere from 6 to 9 months or more. Can you tell people what you, in your own words, like what you do for Capital Pulse?
So what I do for Capital Pulse is that I'm the co-CEO of a startup called Capital Pulse. And what we do is we analyze medical claims data to give hospitals access to low-cost financing so that they can, continue providing services to patients even when there's a lag in their reimbursement from insurance companies.
So this is pretty poignant, I guess. Maybe that's the right word. Given the stuff that's happening with Change Healthcare.
I know that there's been some major hospital chains or groups that have been attacked recently.
Change Healthcare is like a hub of information. A lot of claims information has to pass through Change before it can get paid. And so when they were attacked, hospitals and lots of other healthcare providers couldn't get paid. And Change Healthcare processed something like fully a third of all healthcare claims in the United States. And so that was a big deal. And Capital Pulse can be one risk management solution to help with that. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I would. Part of our goal is to sort of be, a little lifeboat for hospitals in situations where, there's a big gap or a lag in their ability to, get the money that they need to pay their employees and continue providing services.
What is it like being a CEO?
It is challenging and also, can be really rewarding. One of the things I like best about it, is meeting new people and really developing relationships, because that's something that I enjoy. I also really enjoy the management inside the company where, we sort of figure out what everybody needs and how we can all best work together. That's probably my day to day, my favorite part of the job. I mean, my favorite part about the goal of what we're working on is, being able to ultimately help hospitals to provide really good healthcare. But that's, I'm not doing that specific thing every minute.
Is this your passion, or what is your passion?
So my passion is probably just being really curious. I'm really eager to know how things work and how other people are thinking about things, and just sort of learning how things work. So I'd say my passion is being nosy and curious.
Curiosity can lead you down a bunch of different paths. You did a kind of a Ph.D. track, and that was in organismic and evolutionary biology. It was a doctor of philosophy in that topic. How on earth did your curiosity lead you down that path?
I think part of what I found so interesting about biology is that there's so much variability in terms of how things work. And as I said, I like to figure out how things work. And I just find it really fascinating how, things that are so variable can exist and keep on functioning, and how it all works out somehow.
So you believe in evolution?
It's not whether someone believes in evolution or not. Evolution is a fact.
Yeah.
Um, and it's true whether you believe it or not. And you
Yeah.
can believe whatever you want.
What is one of the more interesting things that sticks with you after that? Yeah. What is the thing that piqued your curiosity the most and made you say, huh, I didn't see that coming?
I was a little surprised that, I was several years in and felt like I was making steady progress. And, sort of suddenly things fell into place. And and it happened much faster than I was expecting because, there'd been sort of like yeah, I'm learning these facts and like it's so really interesting. And then suddenly, a broader set of concepts sort of clicked together and I could see way more than what I had been taught.
Hmm.
And I think that's what surprised me was how, like, learning all these small things, I could put them together and suddenly generalize in a way that allowed me to have creative ideas about my own research that I'd like to do.
So would you call that an epiphany?
Well, I think unlike Archimedes or whoever it was who was, jumped out of their bathtub, uh, it unfolded over a
Yeah.
slower period of time. But it was a little bit like that. Like it was over the course of probably like 2 months
Hmm.
where I was like, knew a lot of facts and felt like I was on the right track. And then at the end was like, this is amazing. I see all the colors of the rainbow now.
So have you always been curious like that? Is that like kind of one of your defining characteristics?
I think it probably is, was not always when you're a child, um, adults around you often do not appreciate a child that's too curious.
Hmm.
So it was not always looked at as a positive. Kids are constantly looking at sort of cause and effect, and that's what I was doing. And sometimes was doing or ended up doing things that, were dangerous or that was annoying or those kinds of things. So I would say, yes, I have been curious my whole life.
I can relate. Uh, Do you? Is there a specific time that comes to mind where you got into trouble because you were a little too curious?
I mean, so many times. I think, yeah, geez, I have to say, here's an example of a time that my curiosity was supported in a way that I think was really
Oh,
special.
okay, yeah.
One of the things I was really curious about was, sort of how do how do how do bones work and like how do
Hmm.
joints work and like how do animals move the way they do. And so one of the things that I decided I was going to do I was very young was that collected roadkill and I found out how to like basically like process them in a way that you could reassemble their skeletons, and so I could really firsthand like um dig into those questions I was having. And my amazing mother was like, is either going to be a brilliant scientist or she's going to be a serial killer. And I'm just going to let her go down this road and we're going to find out what it's going to be.
Well, that's delightful. Yeah. Hmm. Well, good for your mom. I like that, and of course we know the ending of that story. I I'm curious. Were there curious people that you looked up to as role models, or who were your role models when you were growing up?
One of my role models actually was a teacher I had in high school. I was clearly gifted, and there's lots of people who are gifted, but I was at that intersection of gifted and also a pain in the butt. So it was actually really special that this teacher saw me and you know looked past me being a pain in the butt and saw the potential. Like if he could harness that pain in the butt energy, I could do things that were beyond, what a high schooler would normally be interested in or even capable of. And he was right. I did a research project and wrote like an honors thesis basically in high school. And we started a stream cleanup, like a group, basically like a team. It was called Stream Team. And we would, rent a truck and take a group of students to local bodies of water and just like pick up all the trash, all these tires and junk and fishing line and all this crap that ends up in our waterways. Just having that connection with a teacher who, saw what I could do and didn't see me being a little bratty and being mouthy as a problem, like he was just like, yeah, this is who you are. It's okay.
Huh. So that sounds spectacular. It sounds like that person kind of could see you, and maybe that was rare. It also sounds like those are things that a typical high school student could organize or put together. How were they able to guide you?
They were able to guide me because they saw what my individual needs were, which was that, I needed a quiet space where I wasn't, being distracted. And I needed, basically to be like pushed in the right direction. And that given some space and some quiet, that, I could do these things that were like the things that like an adult would be doing typically. And I think that was really special about him, is that, he actually took that effort to be, and I can't explain like why he knew that about me, that like, if I could give this girl a closet and a microscope, she could really do something amazing.
I like that. That's very poetic. What was the roadblock with other teachers? Attracted with too many students?
Teachers were really focused on encouraging students who, were either really easy or students who were really difficult. And, I was neither of those. I wasn't like, really disruptive. I did have an attitude and I had opinions about things, but, part of my frustration was that, I didn't like going to school. And if I had to be there, I was going to learn and you were going to teach me. And like, I think that's a little aggressive for a lot of teachers. Like, they don't find that all that pleasant or easy to work with.
Teach for me.
Yeah, not teaching fast enough.
Yeah. Still, do you keep in touch with that person?
Well, I did for a very long time. Unfortunately, he's passed away, but I did. Actually, when I when I finished my dissertation, one of my dedications was to him.
Oh my goodness, that's
And I wrote, his name is Mr. Hatfield. And I wrote, to Mr. Hatfield, the teacher who taught me how to learn. And, I brought him my dissertation and he was an old man by then. And like, it was like creaky and like walking down his front steps and like such a sweetheart. And I showed him my dissertation and I'm like, Mr. Hatfield, here's my dissertation, and I flipped to the dedication page and showed him and he cried. And I was like, oh gosh, I'm so sorry. I went too far. And, but it was really meaningful for him because, that was something that was his goal as a teacher, was to teach students how to learn and how to teach themselves.
yeah.
And so like, I felt really great that, and you know what else he said? He was like, if you're the only student who, who got that, like, it's still worth it.
Oh,
Yeah. I was like, what a sweetheart. Made him feel seen in the end, in the way that I had when I was much, much younger.
That's beautiful. It sounds like you learned a lot of academic stuff from him that you wouldn't have been able to otherwise, or maybe not necessarily from him, but he enabled it. But what else what kind of life skills did you take away from that experience?
One of the life skills that I learned was collecting data. And you could generalize that to observation, right? Like he really showed me how to look carefully, and when you weren't sure about something, like how do you find out? Um, and those were all really important life skills, like not only just for somebody who is a scientist, but just anybody who's trying to figure out how to live and how to improve their life, observing what is actually happening and collecting data on it, and then figuring out, okay, where do I look to find a solution to whatever problem I'm having? Like that is a
Hmm.
life skill.
So would you say part of that was that you learned how to follow the data instead of finding the data that supports your conclusion?
Definitely collecting the data was part of what I learned. Um, but also, the question of, if you don't know something, how do you find out? Instead of stopping at, well, I don't know the answer, or like, let's just ask Google, or, back then that was not an option. Like you actually had to be like, okay, what is the question I have? So what is the crux of the question, and where would I go to find out how to answer it? Like not even what is the answer, but how do I figure out how to answer it?
There are people who are there to teach us things, like Mr. Hatfield, and if we're lucky, if we're lucky enough to have an educator with a mission or a passion like that, or so we have our parents, but sometimes our parents aren't necessarily, just because you're a parent doesn't mean you're an expert in parenting. What what kind of things do you wish you would have learned when you were younger?
I think something that would have been better for me to have known when I was younger is how to ask for help, and to ask for help earlier, because that was something that I struggled with as a child, that I felt like if I needed help, I needed to justify it. And, I didn't always have the language or even cognitive skills at the time to put it into words what I needed.
Let me ask you all this in the context of being a woman. Um, do you think what kind of the what were the issues that you faced and the lessons that you learned that you wish you could have learned earlier, um, that are unique to being a woman?
I'm hoping that generations moving forward maybe don't have to deal with this quite as much, but I think a uniting feature of most women's childhoods is that at some point you were bullied, and the adults in your life dismissed it as, well, he probably likes you, or she's jealous, and
Hmm.
so you're just not supposed to feel like you were bullied. And the reality is that bullying is bullying, and like it's not your job as the victim to make up a story about why it's okay, or what they, you know, how you should interpret it. So I think that that's something that's pretty unique to both the time period in which I grew up, and also is something that disproportionately affects women, although it did affect young men as well. And nowadays, I'm really happy to see that we're moving towards understanding that, everybody deserves to be treated respectfully, and that bullying is something that needs to be taken really seriously, not even in protection of someone who is potentially a victim of bullying, but often that people who are doing bullying are not getting what they need.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
it's nice to see children being treated in a more gentle way.
yeah, yeah. That's a great that's a great lesson to take away. I think those things still happen. I was bullied quite a bit as a kid, and from what I hear, at least around here, it doesn't seem to be nearly as big of a problem, but still a problem. It certainly hasn't gone away. I think I think that's something my daughter is is potentially experiencing at school, and I hope she listens to this and and hears what you're saying. What did that feel like to you to have somebody tell you to come up with some sort of reason or excuse for the bullying?
It felt really invalidating, and it felt frustrating because the answer to, someone is hurting me is not, let's try to understand them.
Yeah.
And that was yeah, it was difficult for me as a child.
What kind of message did you need to hear?
I would have liked to hear that, that behavior is really unacceptable, that I was going to get some support from the adults in my life in terms of how to manage or mediate or even just avoid being in a situation where I would be picked on.
Yeah. Hmm. Do you feel like that experience, did it was it traumatic, and did it say like put up a roadblock to your growth, your academic growth and your personal growth?
I think it put up a roadblock in terms of healthy relating to
Hmm.
other people um, for a while. A lot of what helps you get past that is by getting out in the world and meeting other people who are nice and understanding that, like, as people grow into adults, like, they mature, they take more responsibility for their own actions, ideally, in most cases. And you start to sort of soften up and be a little bit more functional over time. But it can be hard to be in a situation where you're being bullied and not receiving a lot of support, because that's something that you're entitled to expect from your life, is that there's going to be people around you to help you and support you.
That would be lovely if everybody could have somebody around them that could support them in a situation like that. You are one of the most resilient people I've ever met. Do you think that experience kind of contributed to your resilience somehow?
Well, what a kind thing to say. So I appreciate that you feel that way. um I think of it more as um like sort of tenacity.
Hmm.
That in some ways, resilience, you imagine, like, okay, bouncing back from a negative experience, and some parts of that are, you have to manage your feelings, you have to self-regulate, you have to, like, shove down the stuff that doesn't serve you, or you process it in time.
Hmm.
um but part of tenacity is just you keep showing up, like, you keep showing up, and until you get your PhD, or whatever your goal is. The most important thing is, you know, if your goal is to get in shape, then the important thing is to show up.
Hmm.
Like, you don't have to do your best every day. You don't even have to do it every day, but you have to show up. And
Yeah.
and I think, while it would be nice to say that adversity can lead to, character building, I don't think that I could make a call and say that, you know, having a really negative experience led to me, being more tenacious. I think it probably led me to having more empathy for people who I think are not being treated fairly. And I think it led me to, caring about the the experiences of especially the children around me.
Hmm.
But the resilience specifically, one could argue that, maybe I would be even more resilient if I felt from an early age like I could turn to an adult and feel supported.
Yeah. I think the science says that even, and I also feel like that people use that that trope as a way to minimize the trauma that people experience from bullying. So, you might say, well, well, at least you're stronger now because you've experienced something like that. And I don't necessarily think that's true. I think if you go through something like that without support, then you maybe come out the other side a little more fragile. As a CEO, though, how important is resilience to you? Is that something you rely on a regular basis?
Definitely. I mean, you can't not show up if you're the CEO.
Yeah, that's the tenacity. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's a really fun way to put it because, for one, showing up can be hard, but on the other hand, it's kind of a hack because I think a lot of people get caught up in perfectionism, and perfectionism is really a really fast way to get burned out, and it is definitely not a way to success in my personal opinion. But showing up is, and then all you have to do, like, it's like many of your values, you don't necessarily have to live perfectly according to your values every day. You get credit for trying. You do your best and you call that a win. So I think if you can show up, that's a win. You don't have to actually win, but just show up. Yeah, and that's tenacity, and I think that gets you a lot of the way there. For my kids, tenacity or resilience or perseverance, I think that's one of the most valuable qualities that you can learn, or valuable skills you can learn. Yeah, but it is. I think some of my kids remind me of you a little bit in that they're just so curious, and they're like, dude, teach me, stop being tired and teach me. And then I always remind myself that you know that persistence is and tenacity, it's a wonderful quality. So I need to stop resisting their curiosity and support it. Yeah.
It seems like teaching them boundaries also has value, though.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's true. I mean, it's a difficult balance, and you don't know if you've done it right until you examine it in retrospect. So you have I try to give myself a lot of uh, leeway there, but definitely uh, resilience and tenacity and perseverance. Yeah, I try to nurture those as much as I can. So you mentioned that one of the things that you really love about your job is relationships. What is it that appeals to you so much about relationships? Why is that one of your favorite things?
I think it's probably one of my favorite things because I really genuinely care about people. And when you can really connect with somebody and not even just, there's a professional connection where, you're like, I have pretty good feelings about that person and I like working with them. I would like to work with them more moving forward. But, if you can really connect, I mean, that's really part of what makes being a human, you know, pleasant, is feeling like you're part of a greater society.
How do you connect with somebody, or when you come away from an interaction, what is it that happened that made you feel like, oh, we just had a great connection?
I think really understanding each other and, really, really engaging with what the other person is saying. And part of that is listening really well and then being curious in the moment and saying, would you be willing to tell me a little bit more about this thing? Or, how did that make you feel? Or, you know, um, engaging with it to the point that you're sort of like imagining yourself in their situation. And you're like, well, what would I be thinking? Is that
Mhm.
what they're thinking? And then you have to check with them because you can't assume, because everyone's really different, and figuring out the ways that people are similar and people are different. Like, that's part of what connecting is sort of understanding each other.
That makes sense. That, and you're speaking of it in really broad terms. So I wonder, do you feel like you can connect with all sorts of people who are quite a bit different from you because of those same principles that you're talking about?
Yeah, I do. I have been told, I've heard from many coworkers that, you know, they've kidded around and said, everybody likes you, Lexi. Everybody likes you. Um, and I don't like everybody, but I'm glad they like me. Uh, uh, I think I do. Even people who, I might struggle to connect with, or I don't. There's something about their approach to dealing with me that I'm not super crazy about. I still try to hear them and understand them, even if they are not able to sort of connect with me in that way.
Hmm. I do think that's kind of a rare quality to be able to do that.
um I mean, I think part of healthy connecting is deciding where the boundaries are going to be on the connection, and sort of like, as a woman, often, especially dealing with older men, they might struggle to respect me in some ways, or call me a pet name or something like that. And so, like, my choice for that connection is that I'm never gonna let them, like, really get to know me, because they don't respect me, and it's not healthy to let people in who you can't trust and to respect you. And that's okay. I mean, that's a kind of connection, because I'm like, okay, I understand what they're like. They understand as much of me as they need to understand. And we can work together moving forward, hopefully. But you're not trying to make, like, best friends with every single person, especially if, they're treating you in a way that is not um, isn't healthy for you.
Yeah, yeah. I admire your tenacity and your professionalism, especially in the finance world as a woman, and you know the former CEO Susan. Similarly, I feel about her, and just in awe of her ability to be successful in that world. Because, well, I remember when we worked together, you and I, at Brown and Sears, and we would be consulting, and we'd go into a meeting with some new people. We'd be, I don't know what it was. I can't remember a specific example, but let's say we were pitching some product, and we'd go, and it was, again, a finance product. And so all the people we were talking to would be older white men in the finance industry. And I remember distinctly this happening multiple times, where it was a meet and greet, and we would go around the circle, and everybody would introduce themselves. And I would be thinking, oh, I'd introduce myself, and I'd kind of, so this is partly my fault, but I should have just said, and here's my partner, and let you introduce yourself. But what ended up happening was everybody else just started introducing themselves. And then when they got done, they just jumped into the meeting without letting you introduce yourself. And there were multiple times where I had to stop and say, oh, hold on, you know, let me let my partner introduce herself. And I just yeah, that happened once, and I thought, I hoped it was just an accident, but it happened multiple times. And so yeah, and that was disrespectful, and I could see how it's just a kind of a unique challenge. I admire your ability to hold boundaries and be professional, and still also use your ability to connect with people, in spite of that kind of the situation, which was clearly biased. You remember those, I'm sure.
I do. Yeah, and I mean, that's a great example of how important it is for men to be allies. because, there's a completely different, um, there's a completely different power dynamic between, someone who's in the in group calling everybody else out on their bias than somebody who's in the out group trying to call everybody out on their
Yeah.
bias. And part of what helped me was you being so positive about what I had to offer, because often I would go into meetings and because I wasn't what they were expecting, they didn't know what to expect, and we actually at times got a little bit of an advantage because they just didn't know.
Mhm.
But what I'm saying is that the importance of men to be allies to women is something that both men and women can benefit from.
Hmm. Yeah, that's certainly true for me. Um, yeah. So that that's an interesting situation. For me, it was embarrassing. It shocked me every time it happened because I didn't, you know, I don't I don't like to think about my whole gender being so uninformed and completely just oblivious to the situation. I like your ethical decisions, but I'm curious what they're based on. Like, what kind of framework do you use to make those decisions?
One of the sort of tools I use to think about ethical decisions is sort of, I mean, it's a proxy for thinking about how does this affect other people, is to imagine, whatever the decision is that you're trying to make, on the front page of the New York Times, and say, okay, it's on the front page of the New York Times. Everybody's going to see this. My, granny in her nursing home, and it's going to be in the library for all time. And people from all walks of life are going to see this. How am I going to feel about that? And I think that has helped me in a number of ways, because often making the right decision doesn't feel like the right decision in
Hmm.
your feelings. And you have to make that decision regardless.
Hmm.
And, there may be people who disagree with you, but if you are making a decision that you are proud of and you think is the right one, and you think that, you know, it's not something that you're going to be embarrassed about later or feel like, you hurt somebody,
Hmm.
then, I mean, that's a defensible decision.
Hmm. Is there a time where you struggled to make a decision? Maybe the newspaper tool didn't quite help you come to a final conclusion on that decision. Was there a time where you really struggled with the decision? Can you tell me about one of those?
Sure. I think one of the times that comes up is actually in navigating relationships that are no longer working, and not just romantic relationships, but all kinds of important relationships in your life where there's no real like right or wrong. You're sort of at the point where you're like, okay, I need to minimize the harm to both of us, but also, you know set some really firm boundaries about how I need to be treated and what I would like the relationship to look like moving forward.
Hmm.
I think those are situations in which it's hard to know what the right decision is. And you're in my, front of the New York Times sniff test doesn't necessarily work. And those are decisions you're going to keep looking back on and saying, did I do the right thing? Like, should I've done something else?
Yeah.
And over time, you just have to learn to live with the decision that you made.
So where did you learn to navigate those sorts of decisions?
Through a lot of trial and error. I
Yeah.
think also doing a lot of, sort of stress management for myself, like something that was important to being able to make good decisions, it was being calm and sort of being able to regulate my own level of like emotional activation.
Mm-hmm.
Because, even the most well-regulated person has a threshold at which, when they get over it, are acting from their emotions and not from their like rational thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And so I needed to learn to be able to stay under that always.
Wow.
And that's what allows me to make a good decision. And part of being able to do that is knowing when you need to walk away and when you need to set a boundary. And you do that before you get angry, not when you get angry, because that's when it's too late.
Yeah. Yeah, that's your signal. It's you've already passed the threshold. So I want to wrap things up with my last question, something I really love to ask because many people don't put a whole lot of effort into it, and that is, what are your personal values? And I think many people, if not most people, have de facto personal values. It is just your personal values that come up because this is what you do every day. And so whether you've actually thought about your personal values or not, you have some that you exhibit. So my question for you is, have you put some intentional thought into what your values are? And then what are they?
Yes, I definitely have. My personal values are respect, both giving and receiving. And part of that is healthy boundaries and, checking in and making sure everybody's on the same page. Another one of my values, really two sides of the same coin, is, honesty and integrity. Is Honesty is about reporting accurately the information that the person needs to know to make good decisions and make informed decisions for themselves about events that have happened in the past. And
Mhm.
integrity is doing that same thing, but about events that you are going, or me, that I am going to be involved in and have some control over moving forward.
Mhm.
So part of it, what is integrity, is saying, here's how I am going to act in the future. And then doing that.
Mhm. That's lovely. Hmm. I like that one. I think there are a lot of people who would look up to you as a role model, somebody wanting to be a business leader, maybe a young woman wanting to be a scientist when they grow up. Is there any message you want to leave those people with?
I think my message would be to find the right people to bolster you, that nobody is succeeding or failing in a vacuum with no one else around. Everybody needs guidance and everybody needs mentorship. And to find those people who are going to be able to give you access to the resources that you need to follow whatever goals that you have.
Well, thanks a million for doing this. It's absolutely lovely.
All right, great. Thanks, Jason.
So I hope you learned some things today about how everyday people can be amazing and about the inside of the mind of a CEO of a finance company. If you enjoyed this and you think a friend could benefit from this information, like this video and share it with them. If you want to see more content about everyday amazing people or how to learn vital life skills like skepticism and resilience, subscribe to the channel. If you want to get step-by-step instructions on how to learn these life skills or how to teach it to your kids, then go to our website at www.citizensofearth.com and become a member. It's the mission at Citizens of Earth to enable measurable improvement in life satisfaction through fun, accessible, and science-based educational framework. Thanks for watching today, and see you next time.